So after almost 4 years, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has finally released for the PlayStation 5. With much anticipation behind it, considering that this game will cover the events after the party leaves Midgar, this game had lofty expectations to fill. Personally, Remake was my game of the gen from the previous generation, and I couldn't wait for this next installment to finally release. With a Metacritic score of 92 and much praise from both professional critics and users, this game seems to have delivered on everything it set out to do. So that brings up the question, does Final Fantasy VII Rebirth live up to the hype? Let's discuss.
Got some fiends at R12!
Let's go.
Before I get into anything else, I wanted to address the elephant in the room, the graphics. If you haven't yet played this game and were curious if the game really is that blurry on performance mode, the truth is, it really is that blurry. It's not bad to the point to where it's unplayable, but it definitely alters the experience. If you were to stand in a well-lit area within the game and switch between quality and performance mode, there is a noticeable difference in the graphics. As always, there's a trade-off, because if you want 60 FPS, you have to use performance mode, but if you want that high graphic fidelity, then you have to game in 30 FPS. For my playthrough, I started on performance because I wanted the 60 frames, which does feel great, but once I turned on quality mode, I couldn't go back. The way this game looks on that mode is incredible. The way colors mesh and blend together within each region is truly a sight to see. Add the CGI-like cutscenes where the graphics are dialed up to like PlayStation 10, and this game is visually amazing. If you played 7 Remake, then you already know how good this game can look at times. Speaking of the last game, it's crazy that Rebirth is suffering quality issues in its performance mode, because I believe the same thing happened in that game at launch as well. It wasn't until the Intermission DLC, which included the PS5 upgrade, where a lot of those graphical issues were fixed, and that performance mode looks good while still running at 60 FPS. Regardless, the main question I wanted to address was which mode should you play the game on? In my opinion, I would say play the game on quality mode for your first playthrough, and then on performance for all your sessions after. The game looks way too good to not play on quality mode, and once your eyes adjust to the 30 FPS, you'll get used to playing on that mode. If you're one of those people that really can't stand 30 FPS, then don't worry, the graphics on performance mode are blurry, but not so blurry that it'll ruin your experience. Hopefully by the time this video drops, or soon after, a patch will have been released, so this is no longer an issue.
It was an absolute pleasure working with you in Midgar. Thank you again. Your invaluable intel allowed me to create so much materia.
When it comes to the gameplay, on the surface, Rebirth plays the same as Remake. The combat is still in third person and focuses strictly on the action. If you played Remake, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Going into this game, I didn't think there would be a way to improve upon the combat, but to my surprise, Square actually did it. Most notably, you have the ability to use more party members than just Cloud, Barret, Tifa, and Aerith. You meet these characters over the course of the story, and after they join your party, you can customize them just like you could the others. To make things even better, you're able to create different party combinations and swap them out in between fights. So in my playthrough, my party mostly consisted of Cloud, Tifa, and Barret, but when I didn't want to use that trio, I swapped them for Aerith, Red 13, or someone else. Being able to change your party so quickly made it easy to adjust when fighting enemies that have certain abilities that your current group may not be equipped for. It's also a huge time saver as well, since you can always have party sets ready to go instead of having to readjust a single party every time you run into some problems. If you played the intermission episode that was included in the remake, then you're familiar with the synergy abilities and how they work. However, in Rebirth, the same synergy mechanics were enhanced and made even better than they were before. Since you have more party members, you're able to perform a lot more synergy abilities simply to the larger party size. I loved how each of these moves were unique to the specific combination of characters that could use them. What's even cooler is that the animations for these attacks differed between the characters as well. It wasn't like there was a couple of synergy abilities that each party member shared with each other and the animations were the same no matter what. It's actually the complete opposite. Each attack looked flashy and different, regardless of the characters who were performing it. More importantly, the functionality of these abilities. At first, they seem like an afterthought, but once you understand that using character-specific moves increases your synergy, it becomes obvious how easy it is to gain access to these powerful moves. Once acquired, using the moves feels like mini limits, as they're very strong and can unleash some major damage depending on the enemy. Take it a step further and they have beneficial status effects that can come in clutch during the fights. I can't tell you how many times I was fighting and I was running low on MP when I used a synergy move that granted me unlimited MP for a period of time. One of the more subtle additions that I thought was very helpful was the synergy skills. These are separate from the abilities as they don't require you to use specific moves to build up synergy, but rather can be activated simply by pressing a button combination. Honestly, I ignored these until one moment where I was using Barret and defending, and when I accidentally pressed the right inputs and activated it. That's when it all clicked. It finally dawned on me that these skills can be used anytime during battle and are shared between party members just like the abilities, but are just as useful since they can be performed in the perfect situation. Whether you prefer to use synergy abilities, skills, or a combination of the two, knowing when and how to use them is crucial to surviving each fight. Just this mechanic alone was enough to vastly improve the combat and make it better than it was in Remake. But you may be wondering, how exactly do we choose which abilities and skills to unlock, and can we swap one for another? Well, that's explained perfectly in a new feature called Folios. I won't go too in depth here, but in this sort of book, you're able to use the skill points you earn throughout the game for each character and spend them on new synergy abilities and upgrades. Let's say you have 20 SP for Cloud and you wanted to unlock a new synergy ability. This is the place where you're going to be able to do that. What I would deem just as important is the character upgrades that are placed in between all the synergy stuff. These stat boosts differ between each person and can change up their gameplay drastically. Whether that's increasing a character's magic damage or boosting their attack power, every upgrade is beneficial and worth spending the points on. If you played Remake, then you know how many various weapons you have at your disposal between the characters, and that you have to level them up to unlock certain move abilities that you can use no matter the weapon equipped. That's still present here, but what surprised me is that the weapon upgrade system was actually scrapped and turned into automatic upgrades instead. I did like how it was before, where you earned points and then you access this galaxy-like menu where you could choose what upgrade you wanted to equip for each weapon, but now that I think about it, you're kind of already doing that in Folios, so it might have been kind of repetitive. Regardless, it's easy to add these upgrades to the weapons because there's an option in the menu to simply attach the upgrades to your loadout. Although it's worth mentioning that you can see what upgrades you have and what you're going to unlock next by going to the Upgrade Weapons tab. A slight tweak in the weapon upgrade system that seems drastic at first, but it's really easy to get used to. In my opinion, that's pretty much everything worth mentioning regarding the combat specifically. Anything else new you'll pick up on when you play the game yourself. But now I want to shed some light on the most notable aspect of the game, the world.
That city they're headed to, is that...
Junar. Shinra territory. Come on.
If you played through the original FF7, then you already know that this part of the trilogy was going to have us finally venture outside of Midgar and experience all the different areas that this world has to offer. For me personally, I never played through the entirety of the original, so I had no idea what was coming next. After finishing Remake for the first time, I was actually content with staying in Midgar. To me, it felt like the different sectors within Midgar were all different from each other, so when I realized we actually leave the city, I was curious how it could get even better. And man, I had no idea. When you step out into the first region, the grasslands, it really hits you how large this game actually is. Before, when you're in Midgard, there was no way to truly grasp how big the world outside the city was, but once you step foot onto that lush green grass, it truly hits you. As you begin running around each region, it seems like it's not that big, but when you open up the world map, you realize you're only in one small area and there's a lot more to explore. What's even more daunting is the fact that there's more regions that you have yet to explore, and that can be overwhelming in itself. But what makes this semi-open world so great is that each and every region is dense and packed with an absurd amount of things to do. And no, I'm not exaggerating, each area really is jam-packed with content. Once you unlock a region, you can spend dozens upon dozens of hours unlocking more of the map and completing everything inside the region before moving on. It really is like a bottomless pit. You can get lost in the sheer amount of side content that there is in the game. There's side quests, activation towers, combat trials, summon shrines, and a lot more. From what I've heard, people aren't happy with the way the content is organized because it reminds them of a Ubisoft title, but when I thought about it, I don't know of another way to properly track all this stuff without making it somewhat similar to the typical Ubisoft formula. More importantly, additional activities open up in previously explored regions as you progress further in the game. It feels almost never ending, as if you'll never run out of side things to do. In my opinion, this is exactly how the game needed to be created. Coming from Midgard, which was essentially a lot of long hallways, having this open area full of life was a drastic difference from what we experienced in Remake. Out of all the things to do in the world, I thought the side quests were the most notable, just because of how much they were improved from before. In Remake, they were arguably the worst aspect of the entire game. Many of them were fetch quests and offered no real substance, making them easy to skip when coming back for additional playthroughs. However, in Rebirth, all of that has changed. So many of these quests are memorable and actually have some story behind them. Most importantly, it's all coherent and connected to the overall world of FF7. The dialogue and conversations in these quests are not always important, but they do add context to various details and lore about the world or previous events. For example, in one of the later regions in the game, I started up a side activity only for the dialogue to confirm a question that was left unanswered in the first game. Moments like these made me realize that there is so much content packed into this game outside the main story that it feels like a necessity to complete it all. If you were worried about the side quests being as bad as they were in Remake, don't be, because they're vastly improved. Now, once you play the game, you'll discover all the things this has to offer, but what I think outweighs everything is Queen's Blood.
It makes you the perfect opponent. Come, and don't you dare hold anything back.
This card game is ridiculously addicting, and this is from someone who doesn't like playing card games. The game seems complex at first, but once you take the time to understand how it works and how to get better, it becomes impossible to put down. I loved building my decks, understanding the abilities of the cards, and then using those cards in each match. It got to the point to where I was a Queen's Blood fiend. I was searching each and every region for any Queen's Blood players every chance I got. It didn't matter if I had to backtrack to another region. If I missed a Queen's Blood match, I was looking for it. To make it even better, you faced more challenging players and the game itself evolves as you progress further throughout the story. Honestly, I don't want any DLC for this game because I want part 3 as soon as possible, but if Square decides to release a Queen's Blood expansion, I'm there day one. The last thing I wanted to mention regarding the open world was how well the regions were depicted. Each region feels unique and separate from the next, not only in look but how you traverse through each area. Moving through one region will not be exactly the same as moving through another. Of course you can run from place to place, but the other means of transportation makes each region memorable. Using the chocobos and their unique traversal mechanics made me like some regions over others, but when you consider all the content included along with the story elements, I thought the regions were really well done. The open world is the shining star of this title and is the main thing that makes it stand out from Remake.
Managed to get your truck fixed?
Indeed I did. You must have been my lucky charms. She started up right after you left. Anywho, what can I do you for? You in the market for some fine feathered friends by any chance?
Now when it comes to the story, this is the area of the game where I was the most conflicted. I'll avoid spoilers, so don't worry, but by the time I finished the game, my head was spinning. Picking up after the events of Remake, it was nice to be thrust right back into the world of FF7, making it seem like no time had passed at all. I thought Square did a great job at weaving the story in throughout the regions and main missions, all while keeping you in suspense in regards to what would happen next. If you played the original, then you know that a certain character dies towards the end, and knowing that information kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time. Like no matter how far in the story I got, I knew I wasn't going to get the answer that I wanted until I finished the game. I thought the pacing was good and did a solid job at balancing the low and high moments. Many times there were sections where I was like, okay, can we fight some people now? And right as I thought that, my wish was granted. Even still, I never got bored in any cutscenes, even the ones that seemed like they would never end. It's worth noting that the dialogue in these scenes was improved because there were moments that actually made me laugh. And I don't mean chuckle, like I was genuinely laughing at what the characters had said. On the flip side, I feel like there was plenty of emotional moments that help remind you of what was at stake and the consequences of our past actions. The introduction of new characters made the interaction with returning characters feel a lot more impactful. As someone who didn't play the original, learning more about our main cast gave me a deeper appreciation for who they are and what they've been through. It felt as if this game fleshed out the characters enough for you to gravitate more towards one you may have not liked before, which I thought was needed. There's so much that happens with this story that I could make an entire video just discussing that, but to put it simply, this story is cohesive and makes sense until the end game. Once you reach the final stages of the game, the plot goes off the rails and will leave you with more questions than answers. Personally, I thought I had a solid grip on the story with a good idea of what might happen next, but eventually, I realized I was just wrong. By the time this game ends, you're going to be left with a plethora of different emotions and want part 3 more than ever. If you thought the ending of Remake was crazy, I'd argue that Rebirth is even more insane, and I'll leave it at that.
I tried, but I couldn't get to sleep that night. Was too excited, too nervous.
Was pretty much the same for me.
Why?
Yeah, I was surprised too.
I wanted to make a separate section just for the small amount of things I didn't like about the game, just because the rest of it is so good. As I mentioned earlier, the blurriness of performance mode is one of them, but there's a couple others. First, I wanted to mention the traversal animations. Since this game is more open, there's a lot more ways to traverse across each region, but the actual animations themselves could have used some work. It wasn't specific to one character, but when you're jumping as Cloud, or climbing up a wall, actually performing the actions feels really janky. There's a slight delay to the movements that make it feel almost laggy and slow. This could have been due to me playing in 30 FPS, but either way, I would have liked to see these a bit more smoother when going through each area. Another thing I didn't care for was the sections during each chapter where you're forced to play certain minigames. Don't get it twisted, I loved the amount of minigames you played and how many different ones you could choose from. But having main story missions which required you to complete minigames was a little much. Most of the time I didn't mind, but sometimes I was like, alright man, can we just get back to fighting stuff or doing something that's not a game? I didn't feel this way often because the games were so good, but when you run into one of those games you don't care for, you may feel this way too. One thing I was hoping they wouldn't do but ended up doing a lot of was forcing you to play with certain party members in particular sections. I don't mind using each character here and there, but forcing me to use a specific character for a lengthy part of a chapter got annoying quick. I get that there's more party members and Square wants us to use them all, but sometimes you just don't want to use a certain character. But because I was expecting this, I did be sure to upgrade everybody as I went through the game, so when these moments did happen, I was able to rebound quickly. Sadly, one thing I was hoping would be tweaked, but wasn't, was the aerial combat. Unfortunately, trying to reach aerial enemies is still a pain. You have to use magic or a party member with range attacks that can easily reach these enemies. Maybe it's because there's no jump button, but trying to use physical attacks against anything in the air just sucks. I would say the best thing to do is to just use a character ability if you want to use physical attacks mid-air. The lock on is still a bit off in this game too. You can easily lock onto enemies, but for some reason when you move the camera, the lock on moves with the camera instead of staying on the enemy. It's not a huge deal because you can re-lock onto the enemy, but many times I found myself hitting enemies that I didn't want to hit. Even worse when you wasted an ATB meter doing so. In my personal opinion, I don't think the devs even looked at this aspect of the game. I think that they think it's perfectly fine, even though it's definitely not. Regarding what I didn't like about it, that's really it. Everything that I had issues with didn't ruin the gameplay experience, just minor things that I would like to see updated in the final installment. But if you thought the game had more issues with things like repetitiveness, tediousness, or something else, then I totally understand because those are definitely valid criticisms. Overall, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is an incredible game that never overstays its welcome. Everything that was established in Remake is fleshed out and made 1,000 times better. From the combat, open world, music, and story, Rebirth is truly a roller coaster ride of a game. So to answer the question, does Final Fantasy VII Rebirth live up to the hype? The answer is absolutely. If you're a fan of Final Fantasy, then I think this game is perfect for you. Honestly, if I had to rate this game, I would give it a 9.5. Yes, it's not a perfect game, but I can't take more points off for those minor gripes I had because that would be a lie. I enjoyed my time with this title from start to finish, and not for one single second did I want to stop playing during my entire playthrough. After 82 hours and one hell of a ride, I'm so glad I finally finished Rebirth and I cannot wait until part 3 comes out. What did you think about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth? Did you like this more than 7 Remake? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
Here I am, your son. Mother, together we will reclaim our world, and I know exactly how we can do that. The Promised Land.
Sephiroth!